Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. We now, I think, have resolved the technical issues, at least for the moment. We'll see what happens later on. Item one, no, beg your pardon, just let me do the necessary safety announcement. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page at the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be vacated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded, please, to use their microphone when speaking. And that does take us on to item one, which is the appointment of substitutes. Margaret?
There are no substitutes this evening, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Item two, declarations of interest. Any member have any declaration of interest? Councillor Jagger.
It's regarding the Scala item, and I was involved in the initial aspects of a project, but I'm no longer involved in that.
Thank you. Noted. Item three, public participation. We do have Councillor Hannah Cooper, who's coming to address us on the item on the hire of the Guildhall. So, Councillor...
She's coming for the item itself, Chair. Sorry. I think she's coming on the item itself instead of under public.
so she's coming out as a councillor.
Yeah,
right.
When we get to item 5.
Right, Councillor, you have the option, but I understand you're speaking as a councillor, so you'll speak on the item. Okay, so just wait for us half a minute. Item 4, minutes. To confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December, can I please sign these as a correct record? Agreed? Thank you very much. And that takes us on to item 5, hire of the Guildhall. Councillor Cooper, over to you, and then I'll ask officers to introduce the report and we'll have a debate and discussion on it. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to come and talk to you about my experience of the Victorian Fair. So I'm a supporter of micro businesses. Of course, I came to the craft fair and my husband saw a sign saying courtroom mince pies. So we thought, oh, that would be nice. And was with my family. I thought, nice opportunity to show them the room where I'm often here and not at home with my children. So great. So we got some mince pies. There was a group of ladies serving and I thought, oh, this must be for a charity. So I said, oh, what charity is this? Is this the WI? And then out of the corner of my eye, I see some former Conservative councillors. And I think to myself, well, this is a bit Twilight Zone. And so I said to the lady, what's going on? And she said, oh, it's the Conservative Association. We alternate between Labour and the Conservatives each year. Okay, I said, having already paid my £3 and realised that I had donated to the Conservative Party. And I looked around at the signage, and the signage was very clear. It was tea, coffee, £1, mince pies, £1. There was nothing to tell me where my money was going. The room was packed out, and I was really annoyed about this because I would never donate to a political party other than my own with knowing. So I just felt this was unfair to me, this was unfair to the residents and to the visitors of Worcester, that they didn't have the transparency about how they were funding a political party. And I spoke to officers afterwards who were in the building and I said, what's going on? And they said, oh yeah, that's the Conservatives. And I took it back to my party and we were all horrified by this. So I wanted to come and I wanted to be on record and explain about my experiences, my family. And I'd like to think that I am someone who knows slightly more about the politics of this city council than most residents, and I didn't have a clue until I started to see those individuals. So I just wanted to say how unfair I thought the current policy is. I don't want to say to you how you think I think you should go with this policy, because that's up to you as committee members. but I wanted to be very clear that it's not transparent, it's not fair. My friend and local resident often does the craft fairs here. And she said when it is a Labour craft fair, it's very clear that it's a Labour craft fair. She's paying directly into the Labour Party account. And then I said to her, what happens when it's a Conservative craft fair? And she honestly didn't know whether she had participated in a Conservative Party craft fair or not, because the booking system is different. So there we go. I think that's all I have to say, Chair. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper, for coming along, and all I can hope is that at least you thought the mince pie and the coffee were of good value, at least for £1 each.
Thank you, Chair. I decided that I wouldn't have anything after I found out where my money was going, but by that stage, we'd already paid for my children. Thank you.
Fair enough. Right, Ms Stroud, over to you to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to briefly introduce the report and then pass over to my colleague Claire Chapman to take you through the two substantive sections. So the reason for bringing this report tonight is twofold. Firstly, the Guildhall has a current charging policy which was last reviewed by this committee actually in 2019. It's our proposal tonight that we update that to a Guildhall hiring policy and make some changes consequent on effectively our experience of managing bookings in the building. So that's one thing the report deals with. And secondly, the report's on the agenda because following a discussion at political group leaders, it was recognised that a question had been asked around the hiring of the Guildhall by political groups in relation to fundraising events, and a question had been asked which was within the remit of this committee to consider. So the report also looks at that. And I'll hand over to Claire, but I'll come back in at the end, if I may, in terms of some monitoring officer advice, which I've put into the report itself.
Thank you. Ms Chaplin.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. So, as Sian said, the Guildhall charging policy was agreed back in November 2019, so it is due a review. The Appendix 1 to this report covers the recommended room hiring policy going forward. And if I could draw your attention to Appendix 1, first of all, just to explain to you what the changes to the policy are. What we've tried to do with the recommended changes is to be very clear on the use of the Guildhall and to set some parameters around assessing what's suitable and appropriate events, functions to be held at the Guildhall. So the policy now makes it very clear that first and foremost, the Guildhall is a municipal building with its primary function to host council meetings and committee meetings. And then secondary, it's also a venue to hire for various events, functions, which we do encourage the hire of various functions and events. And what the policy aims to do now is to set the parameters around which events and functions are appropriate for a Grade 1 listed building. And the sort of criteria that we're looking at in terms of assessing whether an event is acceptable are obviously around the protection and safety of the staff, the well-being of members of public, the safety and security of the building, and also to protect the reputation of the council and the Guildhall itself as a heritage site. Just drawing your attention then to 1.5 of the hiring policy, what the policy now does, which was missing previous to this, it sets out those parameters of what's acceptable and what would be considered unacceptable. And then what the policy then goes on to identify are those bookings that are currently chargeable at the full rate, bookings that are chargeable at a 50% concession based on the current published rates, and a criteria that sets out if a booking is non-chargeable and the reasons why those bookings are non-chargeable, together with a list of the current non-chargeable events, meetings and functions. Currently, as Sian Stroud has already informed us, The booking of political groups for fairs around the Christmas period here on a Saturday or before then, or at different weeks before the Christmas fair or after the Christmas fair, are currently booked at a 50% discount. And that is one of the items that this report proposes to discuss, with a recommendation from the monitoring officer that that arrangement ceases. So the two main items then for discussion and consideration and agreement this evening are, one, to agree the changes to the current policy, and two, to agree going forward raising events such as coffee mornings at a 50% concession rate. Sean, did you want to summarise at this point?
Thank you, Ms. Chapman.
Thanks,
Ms. Stroud?
I just wanted to come back in on the legal point. I think it's the arrangement of political groups using the Guildhall at Christmas time is long-standing, and it predates current faces at the table, it's fair to say. This an unusual scenario has occurred in that where to start? The full price, if a 50% discount isn't applied, is of a value now that would be caught by legislation relating to political donations. So with the passage of time, the value of that discount is now at a level where it would be above the £500 threshold at which party political donations rules kick in. So there is a legal argument, untested here tonight, but there is a legal argument which I think has some merit, that the City Council offering a 50% discount is an in-kind benefit which is caught by these regulations and would require the City Council to therefore declare it, which would then take you into the territory of considering the Council's duty under the Nolan principle to be impartial in its use of resources, and to consider whether offering that discount was impartial in its use of resources. So I appreciate that that's an interesting legal position to find ourselves in, and I would just suggest it is perhaps the product of the passage of time and looking at these things afresh. But having identified this legal provision, I must draw it to your attention, committee.
Thank you, Ms. Stroud. Now, throw it open for discussion and debate. Just before I do that, could I just please put on record my thanks to all the Guildhall staff who deal with bookings. Some of them are present this evening. They're invariably helpful. They go out of their way to make the booking as simple as possible, and they really are a joy to work with. So I'd like that on record, to thank the staff in the Guildhall for the work they do, and particularly for the lettings process that they undertake. Just one point before we go any further, colleagues, in case it's raised. Paragraph 13 at the top of the policy, if you look at top of page 13, paragraph 1.7, there is one thing that I think, and I would recommend that we amend, where it says the managing director has an absolute right to refuse a booking. The decision of the managing director is final and not subject to a right of appeal. I must say I have concerns that the word absolute, because I think in legal terms that has a certain connotation, but I'm not entirely happy that it reads that you have no right of appeal. I can think of few areas of public life where there is literally no right of appeal. So what I've asked officers to do, subject to your agreement, is to look at that, to take that away and come up with a form of words which says a decision will be made on whether the booking can be accepted, it's appropriate, etc., etc. If it is not, then a review will go to the managing director. But for the decision finally to go to the managing director, from which there is no appeal, in other words, I think the managing director role, or whoever that person is designated, should be an appeal. I think I would be uncomfortable to have a process where we as a council are saying, you've got no right of appeal, decision's final, you know, if you don't like it, go to court, which I think is completely unreasonable. So I'm putting that to members for part of the discussion, but I would not be happy to, with those words, that somebody has an absolute right, there's no right of appeal, so tough luck. I think we need to be a bit more sensitive on these matters. And also, there may be, you know, nobody's perfect, are they? Somebody could make a mistake. So there needs to be some right of review. So I've asked officers, subject to your agreement, on Tuesday, because this will be going back to council for ratification, to come up with a form of words which I think is more, shall we say, acceptable. And they'll throw it open to the committee. Councillor Petrosky? Fine. Councillor Cookson, Councillor Lamb, then Councillor Petrosky.
Mine will be really quick. So just on that point, I agree with you that it's rewording. You could have the managing director having the right to refuse and an appeal to councillors retrospectively, so there is a process there. I agree with you with the need for the process, but I wouldn't want to slow the bookings down. That actually, on an operational level, the managing director could have a right to refuse a booking, subject to then, if people were unhappy, to have a right to appeal to councillors. But I'd leave that with Sean and Claire and team to come up with an appropriate word for council. I'm quite happy with everything in this report. It was nice listening to Hannah that actually we're not actually the ones liable for not advertising if we've got a Labour Party event. So that was a relief to hear. My question is a really, really pedantic practical one. You've got a list of non-chargeable bookings, and because as it reads, I was like, why is this a non-chargeable one? And that was graduation ceremony processions. Because why is that the university? Why is it not chargeable to?
Good question. Mrs. Chaplin, do you want to answer that one, or Ms. Stroud?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And we've had that conversation as officers as well. And it is an event where potentially we do need to review that. In that, certainly in the last years, and I think it's an historical arrangement. Students when they've come here to then process to the cathedral. So there's a link then with the mayoral element. Last year, those processions did take place from the university, and Sean and I have discussed that and feel it's maybe a conversation that we need to have with the university.
I would really welcome you actually reviewing that and not just automatically putting them forward as a non-chargeable one.
Thank you, Councillor Cookson. Yeah, I think in which case I would suggest we just make it clear that that particular one is under review, rather than put it on the accepted list. Councillor Lamb?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's an interesting document, actually. I mean, I recognise the legal advice about the issues around this 50% discount for political parties. I see that. And I also recognise the importance about transparency. You know, people should know where their money is going to. And it was interesting, the sort of contribution there about people don't want to give their money to political parties and political causes they don't believe in. But what's really interesting, and perhaps someone can correct me, I did think it was Green Party policy to believe in the state funding of political parties. I mean, Adrian Ramsey, the Green deputy leader, when he appeared in front of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, actually gave a long speech in which he argued in favour of UK political parties being funded by the taxpayer to get over the kind of corruption that is sometimes associated with how political parties are funded. Now, if we had that, then you would have a situation where taxpayers' money, my taxpayers' money, paid for political parties I didn't agree with, including the British National Party. Careful about this, about, well, money, I don't want to choose my money to go to political parties I don't believe in. I think political parties, they do have to raise money. You know, political parties spend money as part of their role in representing the people. And, you know, the Christmas fair does raise important money for the Labour Party. And, you know, I don't think it's just about raising money, because I think when we hold these fairs, it is all about political education. It's also about engagement. So I'm less concerned about the 50% contribution being made effectively by the council. And we only have to look at this debate that we've had in the last week about the Frank Hester contributions to the Conservative Party to see the dangers of single rich people giving large amounts of money to political parties and what that means. And therefore, I think it's far more democratic for political parties to raise money from lots of little small donations from individuals, such as through the Christmas fair that we run every year. So I actually think that 50% donation by the Guildhall. I hear the legal advice, although by your own admission, it's not been tested in court, so it's your advice. I still think that's justifiable because of the role that I feel those events actually play in the wider political life of the city. And the other question I would ask as well is under the preferred option, and it talks about, you know, the idea it will be rotated round the 4 political groups or by political groups. I think there is a definition of what is a political group on Worcester City Council. It'd be useful for you to remind me of that, because without wanting to deal in private grief, there is the potential that after the May general elections, there might only be 3 political parties represented on this council. I mean, I'll be quite honest, you know, there is the danger, for them at least, of the Conservative Party being completely wiped out or reduced to so few councillors that they may no longer constitute a political group. So it'd be interesting to know what constitutes a political group, because it might mean that we rotate round 3 parties rather than 4 parties, which would affect the policy in some ways.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I won't ask Ms Stroud to comment on Green Party policy because she's not allowed to, and I don't know what Green Party policy is half the time, so we'll let that one go. But certainly the second question about what it counts as a political group.
Thank you, Chair. So a political group is defined in legislation, and it's actually said that 2 or more people are capable of forming a political group. But the rest of that sentence at Worcester City Council should be a political group that has been formed at Worcester City Council, because it isn't just an abstract concept. No. It's those people who have formed a political group who form effectively part of our House of Representatives. And that is a closed list of people. And I just wanted to clarify as well, the officer advice only related to the 50% discount. It didn't relate to the principle of using the building to you know, recognise the political groups who are represented at the council. And we have, as an officer team, explored that point and thought about analogous situations where if you are a political group that's represented in the House of Commons, inevitably you have more access to those buildings than somebody who isn't represented there. So the officer advice doesn't go as far as to say that fundraising events shouldn't happen in our building. That's really for you to decide. It says that there should be transparency and advertising, and that the 50% discount is a point that's potentially problematic in relation to the legislation.
Thank you, Ms Stroud. Councillor Petrowski, then Councillor Jagger. Councillor Cleary, I know you're a gentleman, Councillor Cleary, so you naturally would have wanted Councillor Jagger to go before you.
Thank you, Chair. Just waiting for the green light, being a good Green councillor. So my reflections on this are, I mean, when I read the proposed text of the policy, I sort of I was really uncomfortable with the word absolute, and I'm very grateful to the chair that there is no such a thing as absolute power and you know, referee in this council. Everybody, including the monarch in this country, is subject to law. So I'd like to thank Chair for this intervention. What I would like to say is that, first of all, I've raised my concerns about this policy back in June 2023, so nearly well, it's coming up to a year now, suggesting that it might be open for misrepresentation. It's long, you know, it should be reviewed. It is open to potential abuse and misinterpretation. So I'm glad that this is finally being done and looked into. What I am not happy about, and where I share my frustration, is that it took for a Green Party member, my colleague, Councillor Cooper, to make unwittingly to make a donation towards the campaigning efforts of the Conservative Party of £3 for this to come in front of us. I think it's very unfortunate. We can find a funny side to it and sort of ask whether Conservatives or indeed Labour or whatever, are happy to return any money and go along that sort of line of argument. But I'd like to suggest something different. I'd like to suggest casting our eyes back on how this council has changed when it comes to the political makeup. In 2012, we had the first Green councillor elected. My learned colleague Annie Lawrenson was elected in 2012. In 2019, Councillor Jagger's colleague, Councillor Olcott, was elected here. And then during the time, in those intervening years, there was definitely more than 2 councillors in terms of political groups on this council. So to suggest that this has been sort of the policy has been operating as a duopoly, as far as I'm concerned. There was no, yes, there was very clear indication that political parties can, use the premises for whatever purposes they would like to use them. But I think in terms of intervening and perhaps seeing how this policy is implied raises a very serious questions. So in that spirit, what I would like to suggest is an amendment to this report. So following 1.2, I would like to suggest to refer the content of this report to the Standards Committee or any relevant committee to see whether the impartiality rules governing the implementation of council policies has been breached here. So that would be my suggestion. I'll leave it to colleagues to see whether it makes sense or not. And I suppose it's not about seeking favours. It's about seeking fairness and level playing field for everybody, whether it's a tiny political party of 2 or big national political parties with ancient history and great achievements in their history. And I'll rest my case here for now. Thank you.
Councillor Petrosky, is that a formal motion?
It is indeed. I'd like to suggest this motion. So just to read it as I have
just
noted
repeat the
very
words?
quickly. Yes, yeah. So to refer the content of this report to the Standard Committee or any relevant committee of this council to investigate whether the impartiality rules governing the implementation of council policies have been breached. And the reason for that is just as we've got members of the public here and people perhaps watching on the screen, is that local councils, just like civil government, operate on the principle of impartiality. So civil servants and local officers provide the same kind of advice to all political parties, be it a party of 1 or 2 or party of hundreds. So that's the context for my proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Petrosky. Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Pingree has seconded that. I just start by just checking with Mr. Strell that is in order, that this matter can be referred to another committee. Is it within their competence and remit to be able to look at what is being suggested?
This committee can make a recommendation that another committee looks at a matter, definitely. The Standards Committee's remit is member code of conduct. The Council's internal audit function can look at whether rules have been followed in the wider sense and the control environment is appropriate. If this is a reference to officers, then that's the matter for the Managing Director's disciplinary processes. So from the form of words, I'm unclear who that's directed at.
Councillor Petrosky, could you please clarify that in the light of that advice?
Thank you to Monitoring Officer for this clarification. I think in terms of where the responsibility for this lies. I mean, since the person who's the ultimate arbiter has been mentioned in 1.7 of the suggested policy, I think it should be managing director. I'm not sure who he responds to. I'm trying to clarify the ultimate responsibility for the implementation of this policy and whether it was fair and impartial or not.
I'm just trying to make sure that if this is going to be referred on, it's referred on to the right committee for the right reasons. So that's why I'm getting legal advice from the monitoring officer.
So a different form of words would say, has the policy, you referred to it, whether the policy's been followed. Your first proposal was to investigate impartiality rules. The current policy is silent on the nature of these bookings. Well, it doesn't adequately cover it. So I am struggling a bit to understand exactly where to refer this, to be perfectly honest. You could take the view that you would like internal audit to look at how the situation has come about, but I don't think it's going to fall within the remit of the Standards Committee. So, yeah.
Councillor Prosky, I think in the light of that, if it's not within the competence of the Standards Committee, you need to withdraw or revise your amendment, because it's got to go somewhere where it can go.
I'd like to make a suggestion then. Perhaps we found, because I think because this is a tricky one, because what we are asking about is looking into the implementation of the policy, which bears a significant weight behind it, the principle of impartiality. I think the relevant body, rather than internal audit, which could be subjected to pressures from the ultimate arbiter of how this policy is being interpreted, i.e. managing director, would be the Personnel and General Purposes Subcommittee. So if we can refer it there, I think that would be satisfactory in my eyes.
Ms Stroud, again, is that within the competence of the Purpose and General Purposes Committee?
Well, I mean, I suppose they have general purposes in the title of their committee, so that's quite helpful in that regard. So I agree that that's a logical route. I think we need to be very clear what the amendment is saying. I think it's saying investigate whether the policy was appropriately implemented.
I'm very happy to go through the text. So just Chair, if I may, with your permission, what I was suggesting was the amendment would read as follows: that 1.3 refers to what was the name of the committee again? The Personnel and General Purposes Subcommittee. The investigation it refers to the Personnel and General Purposes Subcommittee to investigate whether the impartiality rules governing the implementation of the policy have been breached or not, or have been upheld. What I'm trying to say here is, it's just to be plainly clear and sort of obvious. It's the first time I heard about this, and it's, you know, it was when Hannah mentioned something. I had absolutely no idea that we can come here and fundraise at a 50% discount. I didn't know that. Is it fair? Did my leaders, did my political group leaders know that? I don't know. Would it be fair?
I'll ask Councillor Pingree if she wants to speak as seconder of the motion.
Yeah, this is a very difficult motion, because essentially what Tom is asking is it fair that we've shown preferential treatment to a certain party or certain parties? So I do think that it needs to be investigated further in terms of when this policy was implemented, and was it fair at the time that this was implemented. So I agree with what you're saying there.
Okay, Councillor Pingree. Right, we're now going to discuss the amendment, but I think in all fairness, Councillor Jagger was going to come in, and now was Councillor Cleary, and then we'll. Do either of you want to speak on the amendment?
I want to say what I was going to say, which is relevant actually.
Okay, in
it
that case,
ties in. So
after you, Councillor Jagger, we'll then go to Councillor Cleary.
So I was looking at the definition of the impartiality principle, and this is me just looking at it. So it says acting and taking decisions impartially, fairly, and on merit. And I was going to talk about the word fairly, and there are different ways that we can look at it. We could argue that fairly and impartially would mean abolishing the 50% discount. But coming from a small political party, and I wasn't aware that we could do this, and there's a good reason we wouldn't do it, because being a small political party might not be able to afford it just as easily. So my argument would be that having a 50% discount, regardless of the size of the party, makes it unfair. And instead of abolishing it, it might be better to move to a situation that makes the current arrangement more fair, so that smaller political parties can benefit from it. So perhaps having the different rates of discount. I realize that creates a legal problem with impartiality, but my view is if the arrangement is available to all, and if the arrangement can be booked by all and it's transparent and people know about it, I don't think that there is an issue of impartiality, because everybody can access. And fairly doesn't necessarily mean treating everybody the same. Fairly might mean different treatment to achieve an equitable outcome. So I don't know if that helps with the amendment or not, but it's just a different take on what we mean by fair and how we achieve fairness.
Thank you, Councillor Jagger. Councillor Owen, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points, but I'll be quick. I wanted to say that I agreed with your suggestion regarding the MD and the right of appeal. That makes a lot of sense to me. Regarding the list of non-chargeable bookings, there's one group on there that no longer exists, that should be removed. That's the Worcester Allotments Forum. I know that because I divvied up their money last year to the local schools. A third point, I'll be honest, I'm not in the slightest bit fussed whether political parties can hire the Guildhall or not. I've bought stuff in the Guildhall year after year for the last 10 years, and I don't care where the money goes, because I've got what I decided to get, which was mince pies or drinks or whatever. I really don't care. If the 50% discount goes, you're not going to get any argument from me. If it stays, you won't get any argument from me. I really don't think it's that important. And honestly, I think we've talked about this long enough.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Cooks, and then Councillor Lamb wanted to come in.
I just wanted to come back on in terms of the amendment. I know where you're coming from, Tom, in terms of this is clearly a historical process that is unfair given the composition of the council. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that, and I think if you refer it to any committee, they're all going to conclude it's an unfair policy. So I guess my feedback on that is almost linked to what Owen was saying, is we need to move on from that. My recommendation would we go, this was a historical process that is unfair. I think we all acknowledge that it was unfair to other parties. I didn't know about it either. I think it predates probably everybody in this room. Are we really saying we want to create a lot of extra work to go back to for officers or other committees to review this, given all the time pressures, when actually what we need to do is draw a line under it and move forward and make sure that what is going forward and what gets recommended and hopefully approved by council next week is something that is fair and equitable and transparent to all political parties going forward, and that there is a requirement for whenever there is political fundraising taking place in the Guildhall, it's very, very clear which political party that is, so that people can make a decision. They can make a decision like Hannah would make, which is, I don't want to put money into any party other than my own, or a decision like Owen would make, which is, I actually don't care if I purchase what I want to purchase. But at least the signs would be there and the transparency was there. So I would just urge that we accept that it was unfair, make sure we have a fair process going forward, a transparent process going forward that resolves the issues.
Thank you, Councillor Cookson. Just a few comments from the Chair. I understand what the thrust of the amendment is, but I would just make a few points. I don't think under that policy anybody was actually excluded. I think the point may have been that not everybody knew they could be included. Nobody was specifically, if you're a small party, you can't do it. It's the small parties didn't know they could do it. I think the very fact that I think there is a feeling now that that was anomalous We're here reviewing it and changing it. So I think in that sense, Councillor Petrosky's amendment is slightly superfluous because his concern that it was unfair, we've now changed it. The question is, to what extent do we ask officers to spend their time going over it, but they can't do anything about it because they've changed it? I'm not quite sure what the purpose of that would be. And the essential point now is that all parties are being treated equally and fairly. I take Councillor Jagger's point about the size of the party, but I really don't think we can go into a system where you can have a sliding scale of how much it costs depending on how many members you are. I think we've got to have some basic rules, and that it applies to if any party wants to avail themselves of this, it's available. And I think there is a point that Ms Stroud mentioned, that given the legal bar now, that the hire of the Guildhall has reached such a level that we're now into that area where it counts, like it or not, as a political donation. So we have to make a decision on that. So it's up to members. My view is that I think we're going to ask officers to spend time that is actually not productive. So I would not really, I won't be supporting the amendment. Councillor Cleary, on the amendment? Go on, it'll be quick if you say what you want to say.
I was going to say, based on what you've just said, surely it's sensible for someone to just put forward a motion and say, we scrap the 50% donation, sorry, 50% discount for political parties, and I've done with it, and we'll vote for it now. Because I'm happy to put that forward after this one has been resolved.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I can only take amendment as they come in. We've got one amendment on the table. Councillor Petrosky, summing up then for the amendment, because I think everybody has had their say.
Thank you, Chair. I can understand why some colleagues want to move on. What I am seeking with this amendment, to achieve with this amendment, whether the rules of impartiality governing the functioning of this council have been breached or not. So it's not the question about, is 50-50 fair or not. What is at the question, at the focus of this amendment is we didn't know about it, and therefore was the implementation of the policy fair. All I'm asking is about reassurances that the impartiality principles governing the functioning of this council haven't been breached. That is all.
Right, members, I think we've had as much discussion as we need on this. I now put it to the vote. Those in favour of the amendment, please show. That is 2. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That amendment is lost. 2 votes to 5. We now, I think, if I can, are there any more discussion on the actual substantive report? Because what I would propose, Councillor Pingree?
I would just like to say that I am in support of removing the 50% reduction for it, because I do think, for the original report, because I do think that it is an in-kind benefit, and I wouldn't want the Guildhall to, face any criticism from that, and I just think it would be wise to remove it. That's all.
Sorry, so are you support? I mean, if I can just clarify for members, in the recommendation on page 1 of the report, it's actually referring to paragraph 3, which is the preferred option. Now, obviously, there could be any number of variations of that, but I would urge committee not to try and think of every possible conceivable permutations, because we could be here for some time, unless they really do make a difference. So, Councillor Pingree, are you saying you're supporting paragraph 3, or you want to move an amendment?
I'm not proposing an amendment. I'm saying I'm supporting paragraph 3 that recommends that the removal of the 50% discount.
Thank you, that clarifies that. So in other words, you'll be supporting the recommendation on page 1, which is basically to adopt the preferred option, which is paragraph 3. Just so for your own clarity, you're happy with that. That's what you're saying.
Yes, I'm in supporting of removing the 50% discount for political groups making
Right.
Christmas fair bookings.
Thank you. One and 1 point. Those in favour, please. Councillor, yes, I'm moving the recommendation on page 1 1.1 and 1.2, which is to accept the preferred option, which is paragraph 3 on page 8 of the report. Those in favour? Which is 1, 2, 3, 4. And those against, please? That's 3. So that is carried. And that is what we'll be proposing at full council next week when we reach that item. So thank you, colleagues, for that rather interesting debate.
Can I just clarify? I'm not sure I voted for the right thing. Just wanted to make sure. I wanted to vote against scrapping, against the recommendation to scrap the 50% discount. Is that what?
Councillor Jagger, what you just voted against was the recommendation, which is on paragraph 1.1 and 1.2 on the front page. And that recommendation, as I said, I think a few times, was paragraph 3, the preferred option. So if you voted against that, you have voted against the preferred option. But it's going to be going to full council next week. If you want to make a very brief statement that you voted, you didn't mean to vote for or against it, you wanted to vote for it, you can say that at full council next week. But we can't undo the vote we've just had. That takes us on to, we've got 2 interactive items here. Item 6, the External Audit Plan 2023-2024. This is an online, and perhaps the technical officers will tell us that Martha Karima, if I pronounce that correctly, and Chris Brown from Assets are available.
Good evening, how are you?
Good evening. You're Martha Karima, and have I pronounced that correctly?
It's Martha Charima, but it's all right. I do understand.
Charima, thank you.
Yes, that's right.
And also, we're expecting Chris Brown as well. Is he with you?
Yes, he's right here. I think he's just going to turn on his video and mic.
Thank you. Just before you start, Ms. Charima, I'd just like to ask Mr. Baldwin here in the City Council just to briefly introduce the report, and then I'll invite you and Mr. Brown to make any comments you wish to make. Mr. Baldwin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to be able to introduce our new external auditors, Assets, to you. You'll recall that, as we've said in previous meetings here, that the previous auditors, external auditors, were Ernst Young, and following the appointment by the Public Sector Appointments Board, Assets have now taken that over. Assets will be conducting the audit for the year end that's about to fall upon us in the next couple of weeks. And I'm pleased to be able to say that their work has already started from a planning point of view and is going well. Well, at least I think it is. Hopefully Martha will confirm that. And this report just sets out the plan that they've presented, and I'll pass over to Martha and Chris, who can talk us through it.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. And can I formally welcome Ms. Charima and Mr. Brown from Assets, and welcome from sunny Edinburgh. I gather you're right up in the sunny Edinburgh. So over to you, please. And welcome to be our new external auditors.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can see and hear you. Please carry on.
Thank you. So we're delighted to be here this evening to present our audit plan. I'm actually standing in tonight for Karen Jones, who's your key audit partner. Karen's on holiday this week. So I'm here with Martha to present your audit plan and answer any questions you have on it. As Mark said, we've already completed our planning work and we're midway through our interim audit work, and from our perspective it's going very well too. So Mark, thanks very much to you and your team for all the support you've been giving Martha and our team in terms of the audit. I'm going to hand over to Martha in a second just to talk through the key issues in the plan. There's one point there that's worth explaining a little bit in advance. It's the only issue that's really an unusual issue, and that's the one that relates to the backlog. So the fact that we've got a large backlog of audits in the sector is causing an awful lot of uncertainty around, particularly around the timing of the completion of the audit work right across the sector. So this is not something that's specific to Worcester City Council. It applies to pretty much every council in the country. There have been some proposals issued by the government, by the National Audit Office on how to clear the backlog. Those proposals haven't concluded yet. They're still out of consultation right now. So we still don't know exactly what we're going to be auditing. It does seem likely that you're going to have a qualified audit opinion for 22-23, possibly even a disclaimed audit opinion for 22-23, which again is consistent with most other councils in the country. But what that means for our audit is at this point a bit uncertain. So while we've identified some significant risks within the audit plan, and none of those are unusual or specific to you as a council, I just wanted to highlight that inherent uncertainty in the environment we're working in right now. So with that, Martha, can you just very briefly talk through the key risks that we've identified in the plan, please?
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much, Chair, for the opportunity. I'm happy to be here today. So I'm going to draw you to the key aspects of the audit plan. If you can just turn to the Appendix 1, page 24. So this is where we basically note the clearly trivial threshold of 57,000, and we're basically saying any areas that we identify that are below this figure will not be reported to yourself. I will also come to the headline materiality later. I just want us to move on to the significant risk on top of what Chris has said. You can find this on page 27. The risks are similar to, you're obviously familiar to some of those risks, and the first one being the management override of controls. We're basically mandated by the ICES, the International Standards on Audit, to have this as a risk, as a significant risk, and we're not allowed to rebut it. Hence, our work will mainly be around journals, that is approval and segregation of duties. Moving on, I'm just going to skip the one that Chris obviously touched on, but that one is also a significant risk, which is the prior year opinion on the financial statements. As Chris mentioned, due to the backstop, there is uncertainty as to the completeness of the opening balances. Hence, we have raised a significant risk around that. Moving on, we have the risk on fraud and revenue recognition. We are also mandated by the ICES to consider it as a risk, but we have the discretion to actually rebut it. And in this case, we have rebutted the risk because there is little opportunity to manipulate revenue or expenditure. We also have a significant risk around PPE and investment property valuation. We consider this to be a risk because it's a key estimate, and due to the subjectivity of measurements and sensitive nature of the assumptions that are used by the valuer. This will lead me to the valuation of the defined benefit pension net liability or asset, which is also our key accounting estimate. And we've classified it as a significant risk due to the complex calculations, subjectivity of measurement, and sensitivity nature of assumptions used by the actuary. So we don't have any further significant risk that we have identified on this stage. I'm just going to move on. As part of our audit, we're also required to consider whether the authority has adequate arrangements in place to achieve value for money. And there are three categories that we are going to be looking at. We have financial sustainability, which looks at how the body plans and manages its resources to ensure it can continue to deliver its services. We also have governance, how the body ensures that it makes informed decisions and properly manages its risk. And the last bit is improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. And we are basically looking at how the council uses information about its cost and performance to improve the way it manages and delivers its service. At the moment, we have completed our planning risk assessment for VFM, and we have not identified any risk of significant weaknesses that we need to report to this council. However, on financial sustainability, we are going to consider as part of our review the arrangements in place around the council's financial planning, including but not limited to their capacity to achieve savings to address the cumulative deficit. We'll definitely give you more information once the VFM field work and completion work has been completed. Just moving on to audit team logistics. So the team comprises of myself, Karen Jones, who is the key audit partner, and Simbongile, who is the senior. We have obviously done some planning work, and we are currently in the process of completing our interim work. We intend to perform our year-end audit the week commencing the 19th of August. Lastly, I'm just going to take you to the maturity page. So in the audit plan, you can find Appendix 1, which is page 38. So basically the overall materiality, we are basically saying that financial statements are considered to be materially misstated where total errors exceed this value. So we have set it at 2% of gross expenditure using the draft statement of accounts as at 31st of March 2022, which gives us a headline materiality of 1.1 million. And performance materiality is what we use to test our transactions and to perform our audit work. And this has been set at 65% of the headline materiality and gives us a figure of 741,000. The figures would definitely be updated to reflect the statement of accounts as of 31st of March 2023. I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive report. Thank you. Do members of the committee have any questions or comments to the external auditors? No? Well, again, let me thank you and Mr. Brown for coming along. We look forward to working with you and in the years ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councillor.
Thank you. And members, the recommendation is that we note the external auditor's audit plan for 23-24. Is that agreed? Agreed? Thank you. Which takes us on to item 8, the external audit update 2021. That is correct, 2021-2 and 2022-23. Mr. Baldwin, if again, just like to briefly introduce this. Incidentally, colleagues, where it says report to follow, it's a verbal report, not a written report. So we are in order. Mr. Baldwin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This item isn't quite so straightforward, I'm afraid. As I've already noted, the current or previous external auditors are Ernst Young, who are currently outstanding for the audits 2021-22 and 2022 to 2023, so the last 2 years. Some work has been done, although it's a relatively small amount of work, and as Chris Brown, as its partner there, referred to, there is a government decision outstanding on whether the government will decree that those audits no longer need to be done and will effectively allow the audit sector to catch up the backlog. Ernst Young emailed me 3 weeks ago saying that they would have a report for this meeting summarising the latest position. Last week, when I asked for that report, I was told it wasn't quite ready, but they would provide a verbal update to this meeting. Unfortunately, the person who we were expecting to attend to provide that verbal update is now not here. Therefore, I'm afraid we're not able to receive that. Don't know whether Shane's got anything to add to that.
Mr. Flynn, I hope you have something to add to that.
Through you, Chair. Well, what I do have is the notes of the meeting I had with Mr. Hariam on the 9th of February. So just to run through that, so just to put you in the picture in terms of what's going to happen. So there was a consultation which was published by the government on the 8th of February and ended on the 7th of March. We don't know the outcome of that as yet. But what it proposed was for those audit opinions which aren't yet completed, the auditors will have the normal opportunities to provide, which are a clean opinion, which is to say they're happy that the accounts present a true and fair view, or a qualified opinion when they are not happy that the accounts present a true and fair view and insist that changes are required, or what is known as a disclaimer. And this disclaimer, the technical definition of this, is where the auditor hasn't been able to satisfy themselves. They've not had sufficient information to reach an opinion. So what the proposal is that the auditors will do sufficient to review the accounts statements that are produced, but they won't carry out any audit testing, and so won't gather the information, won't request the information in the first place for us to provide them, for them to satisfy themselves that the accounts produce a true and fair view. So what I understand is that disclaimer opinion rests on the accounts for the following 2 years. So we will be without a full audit opinion for 21-22, 22-23, 23-24 and 24-25, if I've understood it correctly, because as we've heard, the new auditors will be relying on brought forward balances which they can't verify. So they can't give an absolute guarantee that the transactions which have taken place through the year and have produced that final set of accounts are correct and completely accurate. So they've still got a problem in the following year in terms of the brought forward balances for that one. But once we've got over that page, we might be back in a position where we have clean audit opinions on our accounts. The other question which is not addressed as yet is, the two. One is that there is a value for money opinion which is close to completion. I was advised that we would get that in time for the committee. As Mark said, we haven't had that. And the other is that we don't yet know how the fee will work in respect of these remaining processes. I mean, there is a scale audit fee, which is set by the body which appoints auditors, and that is defined on a set number of tasks and an expectation of a certain amount of work will be done. If they haven't carried out those tasks and haven't undertaken that work, well then, will that scale fee apply, or will there be some other fee? We don't know. There's no clarity about that at the moment. So there are quite a lot of unanswered questions, which unfortunately I can't answer any further than I have already, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn, for doing the best you can. We're grateful to that. The two questions, I'll ask Mr. Baldwin or yourself, because I was determined to ask two questions, so I'm going to ask them, and then you can guess at what they might have said. And to put it very as simply as I can, that the audit has not been completed, and that is there not a financial assurance gap? Both, I think, are significant matters, and I just wondered whether you could say yes or no to either or both of those questions, or whether you can't.
Through you, Chair. It depends on your point of view, I suppose. I mean, we always try to gain ourselves our internal assurances through the processes that we follow and the systems that we have in place, which are reviewed and supported by the work of internal audit, to give us assurance that the accounting processes that we undertake are correct and produce the right results. And we have no reason to suppose that the data we're putting into our systems isn't generating the proper data when it comes out the other side. And there are various checks and review processes to ensure that's the case. So from our point of view, I don't see that there's necessarily a deficit in terms of audit assurance or financial assurance. But from an external point of view, if you're sitting outside looking at the council's accounts, then you would naturally turn to the auditor and say, well, is there a clear opinion? And of course, you won't be able to do that for a number of years. If people understand the context in which these disclaimer opinions have been applied to local government, well, then they'll take them as read. If they don't know that context, then they will be left without that assurance, yes.
I suppose a cheeky question, but I'll ask it anyway because it's cheeky. Have we paid them? And if we haven't, can we withhold payment until we're satisfied with their work?
Cheeky answer, no and yes. We haven't paid them, and we can.
Well, that's something anyway. Right, colleagues, it's difficult to ask any more questions. I think we've had a full report as far as we can. Councillor Cookson.
just wanted to reiterate your point, because you said exactly what I was going to say. It's scary, Alan, when we're on the same page. But if we haven't paid them, we shouldn't be paying them. And I think we should be pushing very strongly to say that there's no other organisations where you'd be paying them when they haven't done the work. So if we have to manage without an external audit, they can manage without the money.
Gosh, I agree with you. It won't do you any good politically, but I agree with you on that as well.
Through you, Chair, the decision about how much we pay them ultimately rests with the PSAA, the body that appoints them, because they've got defined contracts with us as well as with the auditors. And so in the past, there have been a process whereby the auditors have proposed to us their final fee, and we have challenged that. That's then gone to the PSAA for a decision, and they've come back with a figure which is then accepted. So we'll be in the same position. The PSAA will decide what the fee is, and we'll be obliged to pay that.
Yeah. Councillor Cookson.
Just want to say, I assume that we and other local authorities in the same position now are lobbying the PS, whatever they are called, because it is really appalling that these big organisations could be taking money for not doing things. I mean, I take it it's out of our control and we only have a right of appeal, but I would like to think that we and other authorities in the same situation are lobbying now to say that we're in financially stretched circumstances and we shouldn't be paying for services that we don't have.
Mr. Flynn.
I agree, yes, and we will be making representations. Yeah.
Right, colleagues, I think we need to move on. Unsatisfactory situation, though it is, but certainly not of our making. Takes on to item 9. Mr. Green, at last. This is going to be simple and straightforward, isn't it? The internal audit progress report for 23-24. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm pleased to be here as the Council's new Head of Internal Audit. This is the usual internal audit progress report, which sets out progress towards the 2023-24 internal audit plan. To date, there have been 5 reviews finalised, 1 is at final sign-off, 1 is at fieldwork complete, and 8 are in progress. There are no 23-24 assignments which haven't yet been started, and we're confident that the remaining 23-24 work will be completed in time for the annual report of internal audit to be submitted to the next meeting of this committee in July. And I can say that at this stage, I expect to issue a reasonable level of assurance opinion based on the results of the work that's been completed so far and that's in progress. As has been previously reported, there have been some vacancies within the service, with both the previous head of service and team leader leaving around 6 months ago, and an experienced auditor left the service in January. And Shane and I have reviewed the structure of the service. We've advertised for 2 senior auditor positions, and that should help with succession planning, service resilience, and also provide officers with a chance to grow and develop their skills and expertise. And then the other thing I wanted to flag was that an external quality assessment of the service is being carried out in the next few weeks. The results will be presented to the committee in July alongside the annual report, and there'll be a revised programme of quality control and continuous improvement implemented again, which will be brought to this committee. Alongside that, we're also doing a review and a refresh of internal audit coverage, and the aim of that is to maximise alignment with the Council's objectives, its risk profile, and ensure that we're adding as much value as possible. I'll stop there. Members are asked to note the report, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Any questions on the internal audit? Councillor Petrosky.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Chris, and welcome to this council. I have a question around the proposed programme of. Let me just catch up with the pagination and location of it in the report. So, Appendix 1. When we go into on page 46 in my copy. You list the proposed areas to fall within the remit of the internal audit. Is that correct?
Green.
Thank you. These are the audits are actually agreed for the 23-24 internal audit plan. So the proposals for 24-25 will come to the next committee alongside the annual report, the results of the EQA, and the results of the discussions with officers around where we add the most value for the next financial year.
Thank you.
Councillor Petrosky.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That's very helpful. The reason I'm asking this is I've been mentioning this for a while now, since I think I sat on this committee, and pretty much at every meeting, to have a good look at the value for money when it comes to use of consultancy in this council. So I've been on record. I'm not sure whether I asked for it to be minuted, and I'm not sure who pays attention to what I say, but never mind, I'll say it again. I would strongly recommend, considering that we'll be talking about a consultancy bill to the tune of £1.5 million at the next agenda item, to perhaps reprioritise, because if I remember correctly, from your predecessor, there was no plan to include consultancy in that programme for 24-25. My memory might be failing me here, but I think it's of such importance to this council and to the members that should be taken seriously into consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
Okay, thank you for that. I think, first of all, because I'm quite sad, and I've watched the last two the videos of the last two committee meetings, I am aware that consultancy spend was raised, I mean, the meeting before last, and my understanding is that there was an agreement that that would be in the plan for 24-25. And one of the things I would say is any audits that during the course of this year have been reported to this committee with a proposal to defer to 24-25 will, unless a decision is taken to the contrary, automatically be included in 24-25, in addition to requests that have previously been made by this committee. And I'd also say that we do really welcome input from the committee. The committee is gatekeepers to the work that we do. Nothing, the audit plan isn't set in stone, so if there are emerging issues and risks and concerns that members have, then please raise them, we can consider them. And if not today, then if members do have any areas that they wish to raise for inclusion in the year that we're coming into, then if you could contact me by the end of April, then we can consider that in the plan that comes to the committee in July. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I would urge members to actually take up that offer. If you have any suggestions or ideas, please feed them in to Mr. Green. I mean, we need to set the agenda, and so please, if you've got any ideas, put them forward. Thank you, Mr. Green. Any other questions or comments?
Just to thank personally Mr. Green for the pains of going through those meetings and watching them online. I really appreciate it. And also just one final quick comment on appendix number 1, the Joint Museum Services procurement process. It's really interesting. It reads like a reassuring document, but I think what's interesting in the context of governance and how institutions are governed, it strikes me that one of the institutions which relies on our subsidy and is one of the crown in the sort of jewels in the crown of the city, has developed a very successful income generation strategy, including attracting overseas investment. So what I'm saying is it's a source of excellence as far as I'm concerned, and I would urge you, Chris, as a new person with new sort of pairs of eyes, to be open to suggestions and best practice available here in the city.
Thank you. Comments noted. Yes, I'll take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. Committee, we have to note the report. Those in favour of noting the report. As I always say, I don't know how you can not note it because we just spent 10 minutes discussing it, but still. Thank you very much. This takes us on to item 9, the Scala and Corn Exchange Project Review. Perhaps I could ask Mr. Flynn to introduce the report. Mr. Flynn, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The background to this report obviously is well known. We discussed it at length at the previous audit committee, so I don't feel the need to rehearse that. Just to say that I followed a similar approach to Chris, and in fact I reviewed the video of the previous meeting in order to gather together what I thought were the key questions. And I approached the chair and vice chair with those to get their agreement that they were the key questions that we wanted to support. And of course, I had the benefit of Councillor Jagger's questions in written form, so they were easier to find a response to. My approach then was to use the same approach that we'd taken before, the NEO's methodology, because it provides a very forensic approach, but of course to go down a further level and take those detailed questions in each one. The purpose of that really was just to be able to find a way to bring out as much of the information as possible into the report so that members could see where those responses to the questions came from, what the sort of evidence was that I was using. Now, normally I would ask my head of internal audit to do this, but of course at the time we didn't have one. So I undertook the work in my role as Section 151 officer. And then once Chris arrived, asked him to review that and just to give some further assurance to the committee about the methodology and the findings. And he has kindly produced a statement at 2.7 of his opinion of that work. So the report is designed to be focused on those elements of the project which took us up to the committee decision in July of last year when the decision was made to change direction. And if members have a view about what's happened since that point, then just if we come in the discussion, just be clear about which element we're referring to. This report primarily focuses on the questions which were presented last time, which were around how did we get to that point? You know, what was the origin of the process? And so it focuses on that. But I'm happy to take any questions and do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. First of all, can I thank you for really distilling the questions from the last meeting. They were, I think, an excellent distillation of what the issues were and therefore addressing those particular concerns and questions. So thank you for that. Colleagues, what I'd like to do, I mean, there are so many questions and issues here. I think what we must do, though, with self-discipline is remain focused on the issues we have responsibility for. So we're not discussing policy, we're not discussing what the P&R committee might decide at some future date about some new venture. We're discussing how we've got to here in terms of the procedures, risk management, value for money, and things like that. So again, we need to be focused. If you stray and I stray, I've asked Mr. Flynn and Ms. Stroud to put us to order, but I don't think we're likely to stray because we're simply getting answers to the questions that we asked last time. So legitimate questions, genuine concerns, and some answers. Perhaps I could start. I've got an enormous number of questions, but rest assured, I'm not going to ask them all because it would be unfair on the rest of you. But Mr. Flynn, I think I have 4 questions which I would like to ask publicly, and then you can respond accordingly. So just bear with me, colleagues, I go through the report because I don't want to ask more than 3 or 4 questions because I'm sure you will have questions. They may be the same questions as well. And here, let's look at the first one. Right, so just bear with me. I'm just simply trying to distill the various points that I have. The first one is, Mr. Flynn, is paragraph 3.15 and 3.16, page 66. I think you have answered it in our previous discussion, but nonetheless, I think it would be helpful if it was clarified for everybody's benefit. 3.15 talks about these studies concluded that the scheme was viable, then goes on to paragraph 3.16, and then it goes on to say the business case made clear that further work was required to ensure that the proposals were feasible. So I suspect it's a definition of those words, but I think the members of the public, they might think, well, that's one and the same thing. The second question I've got is under 3.24 and 3.25, under page 67, which is really where the question is exactly that. Will the revised proposal result in an impact on revenue budgets of the council? We know that the council gives Swan Theatre, Worcester Theatres, 120,000. What is the revenue cost for the current iteration? because my understanding is that we've got capital, but of course it's revenue that's going to impact on this council's budget. The next question was, and I think other colleagues will certainly raise this one. This is a quick question, but the answer may not be so straightforward. On page 69, Appendix 1, we see that we've paid £1.5 million to consultants. And I think the public will naturally want a bit more clarification on that. And on page 70, there's a question. My next question is, why did we choose a contractor who estimated a cost that was significantly higher than that estimated by the consultant? I've mentioned that one. Mentioned that. I think the final question, Mr. Flynn, that I raised earlier was the accuracy of the original consultants, which told us that there was a market for a new theatre in Worcester, and it appears, from my perspective and many other people's, that wasn't true, that there isn't a market at all. But we paid for those consultants to tell us that. I think Mr. Flynn, I will leave it there, because as I said, other colleagues will have questions as well. So over to you just on those, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take them in order as best I can. In terms of viability versus feasibility, so the original work that was carried out was the development of a business case for the project, and they looked at a number of options and assessed whether or not they were viable in terms of whether there was sufficient demand, whether it was something that was reasonably possible, whether, given the circumstances of the city and the situation here, that it was something which could be achieved, which was viable, was a proposal which would be welcomed and could find a place. The second part of that is to say, well, where and how is that going to work? So the feasibility stage of the work is then going through all the details, employing specialists to take their time to think carefully and work out whether or not what looks like a viable solution or scheme can actually be delivered. What does it take? How much is it going to cost? How is it going to work? What will it look like? What are the options? So that's the distinction between the two elements. So the first piece of the work was, well, is there a demand for a 500-seat theatre in Worcester? And that report said that there was. The next question is, well, how is that going to be delivered? How is it possible? How can we create that? So we are then in the process of the feasibility stage. And to be honest, we are still in that phase. We are still trying to come to a point of decision of saying, well, this is something that can be made to work. In respect of the impact on revenue budgets, the original proposal was very much around the transfer of the current operation of the Swan Theatre into the Scala Theatre. And what the theatre plan, the specialist consultants advised in that respect was that was viable, again, that could be done. But the revenue support, which we currently give to Swan Theatre, would be transferred with it. So that would remain the same. So you could end up with the same situation, but in a different building. Obviously, as things have developed, that picture has changed, and we've continued to consider what are the revenue implications of this. At this point in time, we haven't reached a conclusion about that. There's a lot of work going on at the moment to try and establish an operating model, and we're considering the revenue implications of that. We are targeting, I think Sean will support me, a July Policy and Resources Committee, when we'll have a position on that. But as things stand at the moment, we don't have a picture on what the actual revenue cost will be. In terms of 1.5 million on consultants, I've tried in the report to bring out as much as possible the processes that we went through. I think there are 7 stages that were outlined in terms of the work that was needed. It was clear from the start, and we were advised from the start, and we took that advice, that we would have to appoint specialist consultants and a group of them, not just rely on 1 or 2, but a wide range of consultants to help us achieve this aim. And of course, it has been an iterative process. It's gone through a number of stages, and so therefore there's been a need to revise and review what we've done. And it's always been the case, as far as I can see, that we've tried to do this in an evidence-based way to make sure that we've got that right. And when we haven't been clear about that, challenged back, which has meant doing it again, if necessary, and doing it until we've got it right. And of course, we reached a point where we decided that it wasn't viable. We've got to change direction, so therefore we need further advice, further support from the specialists who are experts and are paid to give us that advice. In terms of why the contractor's estimated costs are higher than the cost consultants suggested, the cost consultants work on the basis of standard costs per the development of a particular facility per square foot, for example. And we went through the procurement process, and we haven't appointed a contractor in the first place. What we have is a preferred bidder, and we're still working with them to determine a cost for the capital works. Now, they have an opinion, they've done their assessments, and they've considered certain things which they think are important in the context of the building and its location and the kind of work they have to do and the phasing of that work. The cost consultants had a different view on that, and we have been through some weeks now of a discussion around, well, what's viable, what's affordable, what's necessary, what's not necessary, and that's a normal process in a capital contract of this sort. Finally, was there a market for a new theatre in Worcester? Well, that's what the viability study said. They looked at demand. They did a proper Green Book evaluation based on the requirements which the department insisted on, and did a very thorough piece of work. But what was very clear, and I've included this in the appendix, was that there wasn't room for a new theatre above the existing ones. This was about moving from the Swan Theatre into a bigger theatre located in the Scala. And where it became problematical was when the process came to, well, retaining the Swan Theatre as well as having a new theatre in Worcester. Then it was clear that you couldn't do that. There wasn't room for a new 500-seat theatre on top of the existing provision. And that's why the Policy and Resources Committee made the decision that we needed to change tack and look at a different approach, which is where we are now.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Just two very quick follows up, then I'll invite the committee to ask questions. On the question of the increasing costs, and obviously this is the value for money question, on page 70, as I pointed out before, it says the preferred contractor cited special circumstances, etc., etc. Can you just enlighten the committee on what these special circumstances were? Because if I recall correctly, they were saying that the price of concrete or steel price increases of 40, 50, 60%, which, notwithstanding Putin, the war in the Ukraine and supply chain problems, seems absolutely excessive. And the final question is, it's on page 96. It says, the project management plan highlights the key risks as the need to understand demand for the use of the facility, in terms of risk, and future income streams not being as high as anticipated, a future risk. Are they the only two risks that you would wish to draw to the attention of this committee?
Through you, Chair. In terms of the increase in costs, that is why we employ cost consultants to advise us on whether or not the costs which are being presented are in line with the market expectations. There is clearly a difference between what the consultants are proposing, and when I'm use the phrase specific requirements, they are looking at the circumstances of the building, its fabric, its condition, the problems with getting materials in and out, the location to the road, a wide range of things which they think are important considerations in developing their costs. And there's also the length of the contract. They're allowing additional time for completion of works on the roof, which are perhaps extended because of the weather. Well, if we can do it earlier and bring it forward into the summer, then we don't necessarily need to be doing that work. So, that could reduce the cost down. So there are a wide range of things which they're referring to in terms of their specific costs. In terms of the risks, there are any number of risks to take into account. I may have picked out those ones for specific reasons in terms of that particular bit. Chair, if I can lean over your shoulder.
Yes.
Does the organised risk management consider risk associated with the future operation of the service or capability? So where it looks at demand, obviously that relates to the future service, and if demand doesn't turn out to be what is expected, then that will have an impact. Of course, demand might be considerably higher than is expected, in which case the venue might turn out to be too small. So that is a real issue in terms of future demand. And yes, income is, well, to my mind, that's a very key risk. Yes, we've got to make sure that the income streams are sufficient to make this the operating model which is eventually developed is sustainable, viable, and gives a long-term benefit to the people of Worcester.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Over to members of the committee. Councillor Cleary.
Thanks, Chair. I wouldn't even know where to start with questions about this, so I'm just going to make just a brief point. I'm absolutely staggered by the number of different consultants that are involved in this, and I've just written down 13 separate consultants, and this is in no way to deride any of these consultants. I don't know what they've done, I don't know what they've been paid, but there's equals cost consultants, there's a theatre plan feasibility consultant, there's an architecture consultant, there's a market analyst consultant, there's a business consultant, there's a creative consultant, there's another consultant, I don't know what it is, it's just an acronym. There's another one that's just an acronym, there's Fusion Building Consultant, there's a fellow called Thomas Lister, there's a Fisher Account Architect, there's another bloke called Graham, there's Speller Metcalf. I'm absolutely staggered. This looks to me as if as many people have got their finger in the pie as possible. And I just think it's just unbelievable. I don't even know where to start with questions, I'm sorry.
Mr. Flynn.
Sorry, Chair, was there a question?
Yes. I think Councillor Cleary was asking why there were so many consultants involved.
Can I just add as well, there's another 7 or 8 consultants on page 99 that I haven't included.
I think it's really important that a project which is of such high value, it's the highest value project probably the council's ever undertaken, we go forward with people who know what they're doing, that we bring in the proper expertise. When CITFA, which is the kind of organisation I pay attention to, says that when making capital projects, one of the key things that organisations like us do is we bring in experts, people who know what they're talking about and whose decision we can rely on. We do this because they're objective in their approach, they're professional, they've got the right background to look at specialist things, and it prevents us getting into situations like some of the councils have been in recently, which we've heard about, where they have gone into really serious difficulty because the Section 151 officer has made decisions and members have trusted the decisions of Section 151 officer, and they haven't been based on the advice of external specialists with an objective view. It's there because it's necessary to work through this in detail, to gather the evidence, to make proper evidence-based decisions. That's why we've done it, and that was the right approach.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Councillor Lamb? No? Councillor Petrosky, yep. I think Councillor Petrosky was being as gentlemanly as Councillor Owen was, but Councillor Jagger, please go ahead. I mean, the gentlemen are prepared to wait.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions, but some of them have already been answered. One of the questions I have is, I walk by the Scala regularly, and I've counted the steps from the door of the Scala to the business that used to be there and that has now moved, and it's about 50 steps. And we've paid almost £1 million in relocation costs. That's about £90,000 per step. My question is why? Why was it so expensive to get a business to move next door?
Mr. Flynn?
All I can say, Chair, is that that we undertook to ensure that when the business moved out, that there would not be any impact on them. That that was a commitment that we made, and that the costs which have been presented to us at every stage have been subject to a proper scrutiny and certification process. It has cost what it has cost.
Councillor Jagger, do you want a supplementary?
Yes. My other question is regarding the Appendix 19. So my original question 7 in the list of questions I submitted, I asked whether the table on Appendix 19 had been used to evaluate the different options. I note from there that I've been assured that it was used, but I also note that it was used in July 2020. And I also note that it was only used the one time to talk about the initial proposal. So specifically, I don't see a cinema option being rated in accordance to that criteria. So my question is, did the current members of PNR use it to make a decision on the latest iteration of the project?
Mr. Flynn?
Through you, Chair. No, they didn't. The Policy and Resources Committee in July of last year asked the officers to take a different approach, which was based on consultation, so to engage with as many stakeholders as possible. And out of that developed a number of proposals. And in the end, there were two which were seen to be viable. And as the report to, I think it was either October or November of last year to Policy and Resources, one of those options was chosen. So it wasn't based, it was a different approach to making the decision as to how to go forward. And since then, just to say that doesn't mean to say that that option is the finished option. We're still working through the process of making sure we can develop a viable operating model on that basis.
Councillor Jagger?
How are we defining viability? What do we mean by viability? Because my understanding of the current program is that it doesn't know how it's going to fund its costs. And I know that there were other proposals that would actually bring in revenue. So my question is, where is that? How are we assessing risk? And how are we defining viability? Because the current option seems riskier than other options that I knew were on the table. So do we know how that's been done?
Mr. Flynn?
Through you, Chair. How to define viability? It's a very broad term, but basically it is a starting point for saying, well, is this something that can be achieved? Okay, so we think that there is a model there which compares with many other arts venues around the country, which has mixed use and various viability. We've been on a number of site visits and considered other options, and have been trying to develop an approach which compares with them, which has seemed to be worked elsewhere. And in some cases, I'm not sure about the economics necessarily, but they are, there are viable ones. There are ones that are sustainable. So that is the approach that's been adopted. Ultimately, it will be a matter for policy and resources to decide whether ultimately that is viable, the operating model which we've developed has worked. The decisions as to go down that route as to the others, as I said, was presented to the committee last year, and they made the determination that was the direction we wanted to go in. But I mean, Sian may be able to say more because she's been somewhat closer to the current approach than I have.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Stroud, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to refer back to the Policy and Resources Committee decision, which obviously members, you have had the opportunity to review yourselves. And I just want to get the date right. And I think it's the October, certainly in Shane's report, he's referred to it. Because the report's absolutely transparent about the criteria that we used. And if you watch the broadcast back of that meeting, 16th of October, there was a discussion at that meeting about the criteria for selecting a preferred option to go forwards, and there were only two options, and they were both provided in the exempt appendix, which I know you've also seen. And both of those options were at a very early stage of infancy, really, in terms of their development, and that's where we were. And in that, yes, I've turned it up. It's the October P&R report, and I'd invite you to watch the broadcast of that. Look at the criteria that the committee were asked to consider in that report, and listen to the discussion on that item about flexibility. So there was a discussion that the committee had about flexible spaces for multiple uses. So addressing your question about risk, the committee at that point considered what was a lower risk option to take forward designs, bearing in mind the constraints that we are under in terms of the government's deadline for design submission and building contract let, a way to mitigate the risk was to design more flexible spaces. And that, amongst other criteria which are listed in that October report, was the basis upon which they made their reasoned decision for preferring the current option which is being progressed. And as Shane says, no final decision has been taken. That would be a matter for PNR, currently scheduled for July.
Councillor Jagger, you want to come back on that, or?
No, thank you. No, I'm okay for now.
Councillor Petrosky, then Councillor Cleary.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the office. I'd like to pay tribute to Shane and also Chris as the new person in working for this council for not only diligence but also honesty. I think it takes personal courage to sort of share facts which are, you know, potentially open to a lot of criticism, and I'd like to pay tribute to you both. I'd like to comment on something and then ask sort of a handful of questions, 2 or 3 questions. But just as a clarification, on page 69 in my report pack, we talk about, so far it's been £3.4 million spent on the project, £1.8 million spent on buying the building, and £980,000 spent on paying the ex-business owners to relocate. Can I just check that this £980,000 sum is final? And the reason I'm asking about this is that when we were very kindly shown around the premises before Christmas back in December, I was taken aback to you know, by the fact that I spotted very clearly equipment which belongs to Shipley, which is still on the premises. So it seems to me that this is an ongoing cost which will increase. It will be more than £980 with whatever pennies. Can I just get clarity on that, please? Because, as I said, there's a big chunk of gambling stuff that was sitting there in December when I was there last time, and I'm assuming that this will be added to the relocation cost. Can I check on that, please?
Mr. Flynn.
Through you, Chair. The 980,000 cost, first of all, just to add, that includes, I think, 200,000 in unrecoverable VAT, which is one of the reasons why it's higher than one might expect. There is equipment that is still there. There was a proposal from the customer who's relocated to remove that equipment for a fee, and we thought that the fee which they were proposing was very high, was excessive. We've got to do a lot of work to remove a lot of items from the internal part of the building, so it seemed to us more cost effective to simply include that in our disposal process. So no, there won't be any additional. That relocation cost figure is final.
Just to be clear, Shane, and thank you for your answer. Where is the money going to come from to remove that stuff, and also how much is it going to cost, please?
I can't be specific as to how much that element will cost, but the money for it is within the budget for the soft strip of the internals of the building. So there is a budgeted amount to remove the remaining fixture and fittings out of the building, and that will be included in it.
Councillor Petrosky, you want to come back?
I don't think I'm going to get an answer here. So no, I think I'll leave it to the next iteration of this committee to see whether new members around the table, whatever the makeup, will be inclined to sort of query that any further. I'm satisfied. Can I please just make a couple of observations?
Yes, over to you. Yes. Yep.
So on page 71 of the report pack, when on the question number 7, very helpfully provided to us by Councillor Jagger, there is the list of objectives which the inception of the project. So we are talking way back when the government money was identified. We decided we are going to go for it, and those objectives include I'll try to comment with perhaps a question mark after each, because so objective 1, it talks about option 2 represents a good fit with the objectives of the Future High Streets Fund. So I get it. That's regeneration. That's absolutely understandable. Why haven't we thought at that early stage in terms of managing risks, being responsible custodians of public money, to take that building and that setup and see for something which is similar in the area, rather than be tempted to brief the consultants on this grandiose idea of a 500-seat theatre, which didn't include any consultation in terms of establishing the demand, having a firm buy-in from the Swan Theatre. None of that was in place, as far as I understand. Why haven't we looked at the likes of Number 8 or the Regal, where private operators, similar to what Councillor Jagger was suggesting earlier, when they came in and helped the council with their help and subsidy to regenerate a piece of the town to bring it to use and to be benefit. So that's my first question. I suppose in terms of I'm speechless when it comes to, this is the first time, by the way, for the record, where myself and Councillor Cleaver are agreeing on something. The use of consultancy is absolutely staggering and inexcusable, and I'm afraid to say this. We failed as a council, and this is me talking about colleagues who are sitting on the Policy and Resources Committee. I was on that committee very shortly, but I think I was sort of moved to ask to whatever. I'm not there any longer. I think we failed in our duty to scrutinise this project, because as far as I'm concerned, it was ill-conceived and unrealistic. I'm really sorry to say that. I'm really sorry to say that. And the reason I'm saying this is that it's yes, there is the benefit of the hindsight. Yes, I completely agree that there are costs. If we look at the Q-Pags Bridge, that was meant to be 9 million. It's 16 million. Why, knowing, and this is something that both officers and members should have in this council, with their experience and expertise, years of sitting around these rooms. Why, knowing all this, did we decide to go for something so grandiose and unrealistic in the first place? It baffles me, and I don't have an answer for that. I really don't.
Mr. Flynn, can you provide Councillor Petrosky with an answer?
I'll do my best, Chair. In terms of the list of objectives, as one of the appendices to the business case shows, there was a significant amount of buy-in from a wide range of people, including the Swan, because there were letters of support from at least 3 people who were involved in the Swan Theatre project, and a wide range of other consultations which took place through the master planning work. So the original concept was within the master plan. We didn't brief the original consultant. Sorry, I say we. There was no briefing of the original consultants towards one proposal, as shown in question on page 72. There were 5 options which were viewed and considered as part of the Green Book methodology business case, and the one which was presented as the best option by a long way, looking at those numbers, was the Swan Theatre proposal. So the answer to the question, well, why did we proceed with that, is because on the basis of an extremely comprehensive, very detailed, very thorough Green Book methodology, that came out as the best option. Why wouldn't we pursue it? In terms of the second proposals, in terms of the list of consultants, there were 3 primary consultants. Most of the others are people who were employed to do specialist things. So, for instance, to look at specialist wiring, or to look at the plumbing arrangements, or the specifics. There is an architect. You wouldn't expect us to go into this project without employing an architect. There's a theatre plan specialist consultants who were responsible for developing the business case, and you wouldn't expect us to develop a project like this without engaging specialist theatre consultants. And there was a cost consultant and project manager, and we couldn't go into this without having an organisation which is well versed in costing out capital development. So those are the three big ones, which most of the others, quite a few of them were sub-consultants from the original business case. So the Green Book methodology requires you to have set evidence based on quite a wide range of factors, and they employed a number of consultants to give them that advice. They also employed people to check the advice to make sure that it was correct and robust. So in each case, we have tried to answer questions by employing people who know what they're talking about to give us proper advice on how to proceed. It seems like a lot because if you put them all in one go, but remember this is a 3-year project. We've been working on this for a long time. There have been a lot of iterations, a lot of changes in approach, a lot of things to consider. And, I absolutely think that what we'll end up with is something which is based on very thorough, very thought out, very carefully prepared approach. In terms of your third question, why, knowing the risk, did we proceed? I think actually I've just answered that in the first one. We proceeded because it was presented to us on the basis of a very thorough Green Book proposal that it was the best option to take.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Councillor Cookson, then Councillor Pingree, and Councillor Jagger. Obviously, I'll come back to you, Councillor Petrosky, at the afterwards. Oh, Councillor Cleary. I'm going to put Councillor Cleary first. I'm going to put sex to one side, the gender to one side, and just simply call Councillor Cleary.
Thanks, Chair. I did have one question, but then Mr. Flynn's answer to a previous question has precipitated a second question, which I'm going to ask first, if that's all right. Am I right in understanding one of your previous answers where you said that the group, or whatever they are, that was previously in the building, that is now no longer in the building because we own it, have offered to remove their rubbish and we pay for it? And we're considering that. That's what I understood when you said it. Is that right or wrong? Because if it's right, I'm even more flabbergasted than I was previously.
Mr. Flynn, can you stop Councillor Cleary being flabbergasted?
Again, I'll do my best, Chair. The undertaking was that Shipleys would relocate and that there would be no detriment to them. That was the deal. We would buy the property and we would fund their relocation costs. That includes relocating their fixtures and fittings. At some point, some items, they decided that they weren't going to relocate. They didn't want them, they didn't fit in the new building, so therefore they would need to dispose of them. They said to us, we will dispose of these and it will cost you this. And we said, don't worry, we're going to get rid of all of this stuff. If I can use an analogy, let's say that we needed to clear out this room because we wanted to do something else with it, and there was a box in the corner, okay, and somebody said, that box will charge you £500 to take it away. And we said, don't, just leave it there. We're getting the skip, we're putting all of this stuff in it, and we'll put the box in as well. There's no extra cost to us. We're not paying the £500 in the relocation cost. That's the most cost-effective value for money option. Oh, sorry, Sean.
Sorry, Chair, obviously, because we're having a debate about this point and we're not standing in the Scala at the moment, I'm just a bit keen that we, for the record, we're clear what the scale of this is relative to the question. And unless I'm mistaken, we're referring to a very small number of redundant machines in the very back of the building. In the furthest room at the back, the auditorium downstairs at the back, a very small number of redundant machines. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed. I wouldn't call it the back of the building. So as you walk into the building from the entrance next to the public toilets, that area there in the far corner, there's a substantial sort of amount of stuff in there. I mean, the reason. Sorry. So
can I just be clear that the reason for my intervention is I just think we just need to be clear tonight that the information that's in front of us we can discuss in detail, but I just wouldn't like that to go on record that we're suggesting the building is full of things that need emptying. We're referring to, if you don't mind me saying, a small number of items in one location within the overall footprint. Would you not agree?
Thank you very much, Chair. What I would say that if fixtures and fittings are included, I wouldn't expect whatever is left there to be there still now. I think it's a very poor deal. If I'm buying a house, I'm making an agreement to buy the house, which includes terms and conditions, or not buy a house because I do not like those terms and conditions. So, I mean, I don't know what's significant, how big of a pile of junk has to be for it to be significant. It's subjective. I struggle to provide a definition here. Thank you.
Thank you. If we go back to the original order, Councillor Cleary, supplementary.
Councillor Petrowski's just said exactly what I was thinking, that this is our building. Why isn't this stuff in the bin, or why isn't it already gone? I just don't get this. Why is it still there? They haven't come to get it because it's rubbish. If it was worth money, they'd have taken it away. It's there because they don't want it. It's not worth anything. Put it in the bin and get rid of it. I can't fathom this. I'm sorry. My second question, and forgive me, this is a serious question, but it's ironic that the next agenda item is called Best Value Assurance Report. So given that that's the next agenda item, do you think we've had best value from this? Because I don't. Can you just give me a serious answer, yes or no?
Mr. Flynn?
Through you, Chair, if you don't mind, Councillor Cleary, I'll wait till the project is finished and then I'll give you an answer.
Councillor Cookson.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back to the purpose of this committee and its audit and governance, and I'm particularly interested in one of the questions in here, and one of it's a clarification that I'd like to ask from Shane, and the other is a question that I'd like to ask the committee. This you're describing as probably one of the most significant projects that Worcester City Council has undertaken probably ever, or at least in recent history. The question you've got here is about the governance structures, and you've answered that with saying that there was a members' reference group and it went through P&R committee. Can I just clarify, therefore, that those were the governance structures and therefore it didn't go anywhere near full council, as far as I'm aware, and were there any member briefings? So that's my sort of question to you, was it purely the member reference group? And because I think this actually creates a lot of the problems that we've got, is that it's a small number of members making the decisions, a member reference group and the P&R. And if it is that, the question then, and it's not for you to decide, I think it's for the committee to decide, or even for full council to decide, is if that was the governance structures, is that what should be the right governance structures for something of this scale going forward? And should we be making a recommendation for some sort of amendment to the constitution of this council that says if there is decisions that are around this level of significance, both financially and politically, that they should actually be reported through to full... I mean, we get all sorts of reports to full council, yet something of this significance, as to my knowledge, hasn't come to full council, hasn't had that ratification, and I would like to request that there is an amendment considered being made to the constitution to make sure that if this is about looking going forward, that any future project is a requirement that there are all member briefings, that there is that level of oversight from all members, and that full council should sign off some of these things going forward. It's less about where we've got to. This is about where we need to go forward to make sure that we don't have another project of this scale be sitting in the same room discussing what went wrong.
Mr. Flynn, and I might bring in Mr. Addish, who's got anything to add.
Through you, Chair, in terms of clarification, so the Policy and Resources Committee is the decision-making committee for this project. I can't answer the question as to whether or not there was this specific debate in council on the options, but of course, all capital is reserved to full council. So the capital programme and the budget reports have consistently, over the last few years, mentioned these projects as major capital projects which we're undertaking. So is at any point council could open up a debate as to whether or not that spending should be agreed or not. So you know, there is a governance element there. There is a balance to be struck between moving at pace, working through the committee system so that committees have the authority to act for the things which are under their remit rather than referring onto council. So there's a decision not only in terms of the overall scale of what should be referred to to council, but but at what decisions within that overall scale. So are we saying that, you know, overall a capital project which is worth 5 million should have a decision at council, but should then each decision go to council, or does it go to committee? So there are a number of questions around that. Just in terms of the member reference group, just to be clear, that's not a decision-making part of the council. It's not part of the decision-making constitution. What it was designed to create a situation where as many people as possible within the leadership of the council had the opportunity to have this kind of discussion and to understand and scrutinise the work. So that actually supported and helped develop the reports which then went on to full council, so we can make sure they were full and comprehensive. So it was a governance structure which was put in place, and it was agreed at committee that MRG should exist for that purpose. But it wasn't actually part of the decision making. It was just part of that wider governance and discussion, which was good practice in terms of project management. So I think there are different views as to how that could be done differently, but I think that what we try to do is put in a robust and thorough governance structure to ensure that as many of the decision makers could be involved as possible in scrutinising and understanding the process. And Sean might want to comment on the governance.
Mr. Dragg, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to say, Chair, members will be aware we have another major capital project already in feasibility stage, and that's the renewal of our cremator site at Aswood, and that also is of significant financial value. So, as you say, in terms of being the Audit and Governance Committee and what proposals you might wish to recommend to full council, there is something ahead of us to think about there as well, about another major project. It's also the case that post-May, officers and members are likely to agree that a governance review is due in any event. Whether that's a very light touch governance review and just tidies up some of the names of the committees, or whether that's a comprehensive governance review, that's for members to decide after the election. But it would be timely to raise the governance of major capital programmes in the context of a governance review. So, yeah.
I would just like to say I would very much welcome that. I recognise that there is a balance to be struck in all of this in terms of the way things are going forward, that we've got a committee system, we need to respect that. But also you look at what gets referred to full council, and we get to discuss at full council things of a lot lower threshold than this. There is a timescale issue as well, therefore we don't want to stop, particularly where there's grant funding involved. But we are 3 years on, and these conversations, there were lots of opportunities when these could have happened within that timescale. So I think it would be incredibly timely if it was incorporated into a governance review. And I was almost wondering whether the committee wanted to make a recommendation that capital projects and how they're going forward is built in, so it does end up in terms of going forward to council. I think the crematorium is a really good example. We had a big, robust conversation about that at an environment committee that we were part of. Then it's taken out of our remit and goes to P&R, and do we ever see it then back from that again as environment? Maybe not, because it becomes a capital project, even though that's where it started. And actually, if you're not on either of those two committees as a member, you're probably not cited on it at all. So therefore, I think all members need to be cited on all capital projects of significance.
Councillor, is it on the same point? Because I want to call Councillor Pingree. She hasn't spoken yet on this. Yeah, Councillor Pingree, over to you.
I don't have a question, just more of a comment, which is to thank you, Shane, for this really, really detailed report. I think you put a lot of work into trying to answer the many, many questions that have come out on this project. In terms of how much we spent on consultants, I do think it is a huge amount. But I do agree with your points, which is that it shouldn't be up to one person to do all the consulting. Obviously, I know you're fantastic, but I imagine you don't have expertise in all of these areas. So I do understand why you've made the decisions that you've made to employ all of these consultants. If we are having a project that is at this scale and is this important to the city, I do think it's really important that we look through all the options and we fully understand what we are investing our money into. That's my point.
Thank you, Councillor Pingree. Councillor Jagger, I think you were next.
Thank you. And to go on from that point, I mean, I do understand that when we pay consultants, people might think that it's excessive. And And there's value in looking at experts and following their advice. I have here the viability report from the Amicon viability report from July 2020. And my concern is because the option that we are currently considering seems very similar to option 2 in that report. And I just want to read out to members some of the things that that consultant we paid so much money for said about that. So in terms of market demand, they said that audiences in Worcester have mainstream interests that could be a community arts hub appeal to a narrow but engaged section of the population. So in other words, they didn't think that there was market demand. When it came to operator interest, they said significant rental income is unlikely to be forthcoming from these organizations, further reinforcing the need for a commercial events program, which, as stated above, could squeeze other venues out of the city and affect their viability. When it comes to ongoing venue revenue, that report says unlikely to come from anywhere but the council in the short term, unless the bid for the Arts Council is made, and so it's never going to be feasible. And when it comes to deliverability, it says that the challenges associated with the revenue sustainability, overall management, commercial programming, alignment with Worcester audiences, and the threat to existing venues means that this is not a straightforward option. So in other words, we paid loads of money for advice that we actually seem to have been ignoring.
Thank you, Councillor Jagger. In fact, a couple of those points are the ones I raised earlier about the need to understand the demand and future income streams. You're absolutely right. Mr. Flynn, but Councillor Jagger raised other points.
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right, but looking at the table on page 72, it was the second best option. So if we can't do the Swan Theatre, then let's go for that.
Councillor Petrosca's next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, officers and colleagues. I was listening very carefully. I particularly appreciate Councillor Cookson's intervention, because I think, and one of the officers' point about the need to review the governance of this council, how decisions are being made, and that includes perhaps citing of major projects by the members, which would then relieve some of the pressure and responsibility from the officers. So I think that would be, and the reason I'm saying this is, I think having the major projects reference group, it doesn't work in the sense that, in my mind, because you have the same people on there who are sitting on P&R, and they are their own judge and jury in a way. In terms of providing this consultative feedback, we are lacking, and I said it last time around here, when we were sitting here on 6th of December, we are lacking the element of scrutiny in this council. So forgive us for overstepping and sort of trying to do something which is meant as help and service to this council. But the serious point is we are lacking scrutiny. The members are lacking the skill to scrutinize. So that's one point. The one thing which I want to sort of bring up to your attention, and because we refer to this table on page 72, the preferred options and the methodology which the consultants were operating in terms of exploring which one of the 5 options is good. Review it, in fact, scrap it. And the reason for that is very simple. I know that the former prominent member of this council, who is still confusing Worcester with Milan, goes around, to Worcester News and says that this council is giving up on its, ambition to make Scala great again. He's confusing La Scala and Milan with Worcester Scala. Worcester's Scala Theatre was a vintage, was it Edwardian theatre, very much like the Regal Theatre. Why on earth the members haven't gone for something which, and this is complete, not to put Councillor Jagger in an embarrassing position. Why on earth haven't we gone for something that bore a track success of delivering records and turning those venues around so that they are profitable, rather than a weight on the council's sort of shoulder and something that we have to subsidise and live with. I really, really strongly recommend reviewing this methodology which was used here. Whoever briefed these people, and as I said, the Swan Theatre they produced the business plan long sort of time after that they were sort of produced. Their commitment wasn't firm enough. The letter of support is not enough to be hinging this kind of risk on it alone. I'm sorry, but that's the conclusion I have to draw here. I mean, this whole thing about snatching the defeat out of the jaws of victory and all that is utterly exhausted. I think I personally had enough. As in, I'm immensely grateful for your detailed work and Shane, and this is not to criticize officers at the latest, but I think collectively this is I don't see it as a hopeful project in the sense that some colleagues, maybe not on this committee, are telling me that I'm being too negative about it. I disagree. I don't think we seem to be learning from mistakes made. I'm very sorry to say that.
Mr. Flynn, over to you.
Through you, Chair. The methodology was the methodology required by the department. So this is a Green Book methodology. It's not something that we chose. It was a methodology that was required. In terms of changing direction, the Policy and Resources Committee said, think about it a different way. So we've thought about it a different way. We've tried different options. We've on the one hand said, well, is the methodology we've been used initially, was it viable? Was it the right approach? We've used a different methodology. Same questions are arising. Is that viable? We should have done something more with more method in it. So there are many different ways of approaching this. I reviewed this in a great deal of detail, and I'm very satisfied that the report which was originally done was extremely thorough, very professional, very comprehensive, and I personally couldn't have wished for a better presentation of the case as to why we should have adopted the approach that we took. And what is the point in spending all this money on consultants if you're not going to follow their advice?
On the same point, Councillor.
Just a clarification. So I suppose my point that I was trying to make around this methodology, and we can, I didn't realise that this is what we are subject to use. So to be a little bit more clearer and more precise, given the nature of the, in fact, two buildings. So what we are talking about here is a former, as I said, Edwardian cinema, which is very similar in many ways to the Regal or even Number 8 in Pershore. Why hasn't this been put as one of the options? Which is an obvious question to ask, isn't it? And given that there was no, the previous report that ended up in this committee on 6th of December did admit that there was no consultation. This is one of the lessons learned, even though the government dictated timelines were strict. We know from last year that when the change of direction call and suggestion came to the P&R committee, the consultation was done in 2 months and it was wrapped up. Whether the conclusion was different or not, that's a different, that's a different story, and it's a policy matter rather than anything else. I wasn't expecting to be applauded, by the way.
Again, Chair.
Mr. Flynn, over to you. Yeah. So.
The cinema option was one that was considered within the original Amiens report and was not presented because there are two extant cinemas, the Odeon and the View, and their view was that there wasn't room for a third. In terms of the latest iteration and the proposal there, without going into all the detail of that, essentially what it came down to was the fact that to create the environment to support that particular venue meant that we would lock ourselves into that we would then not have a flexible facility which we could use for other things in the event that business proved not to be sustainable. So the balance of risk at the time was, and coming back to the point, it's not 2 months. We are still reviewing this. This is still a consultation. People are still looking into the facility and saying what's the best way to go about it. Was that we should go down the route of what was presented in the original thing as the second best option, which was a community arts venue. And as I've said, we've looked at a number of other sites, similar sort of proposals, and they exist, they are viable in other parts of the country, and why shouldn't they be viable in Worcester?
Councillor Pingree.
Just to go back to my stuck record position, which I think Tom and I are very online with, that there was a lack of scrutiny. We have 35 councillors who could have undertaken that scrutiny. Yeah, exactly. Does this committee want to send some sort of resolution that sends some sort of steer to whoever is doing that governance review going forward after the election about wanting to see these big significant capital projects in front of full council or in front of a wider group of members? It's a question not really to this side of the room, more to this side of the room.
I think, Councillor, you raise a very important issue with wider implications. It seems to me that more members need to be involved more often. I think many members are not being kept up to date with things. They're not being involved with decisions. And I think that could be part of the problem with this. But that is for a future occasion, not for us tonight. But I'm sure that will have been flagged up. Councillor Stroud.
Just a quick procedural point. You could, if you wanted as a committee, make a report to council. Council is on Tuesday. So you could under any urgent matters, say you wish this to be considered in a governance review so that you can get that in the minutes on Tuesday night.
If we're going to do that, members, I would strongly urge us to get the wording clear and straightforward so that we know what we're doing. If we're going to present something to council, we need to know what we're doing and why we're doing it, rather than just dash something off now because it's somebody's thought. I agree with you, but... Right. In that case, colleagues, in order to take this forward, would you give the delegated powers to the chair and vice chair to agree this? Otherwise, it won't happen. Is that agreed? In consultation with Sean, we need to get the wording. Oh yes, yes. Certainly, I'm not going to go with the wording without advice on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll get something circulated by Friday morning, Chair.
Yeah. So chair, vice chair can agree this, and then it'll be ready for Tuesday.
Yeah.
Two very. We'll move on. And they're very easy questions, so I'm sure you can give me very easy answers. Will the company who will be identifying demand for any future iteration, will that be the same company that said there was sufficient demand for a 500-seat theatre? Well,
Sean Simpson.
Right. Will it be the same company who gave us perhaps incorrect information to start with? Are they going to be used again to give us more information about the demand for whatever P&R decide they want to do? Because somebody will have to assess the demand, won't they?
Just conscious of us moving into work that's ahead of us before July, but demand an engagement on the vision, because we're obviously very much subject to a planning matter tomorrow. But if this is going forward, then that will be led by the creative consortium who are working up the model instead of previous consultants.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers that one. And the other question is, Mr. Flynn will know the answer to this because he's in charge of the money. As of this moment, has there been any request or is there any expectation or demand at the moment for any ongoing revenue spending for anything that has been decided or agreed up to now? In other words, has there been a budget? Has there been any provision from ongoing revenue to support whatever we did want to do, but obviously in the future it will change?
Not at present, no.
So consequently then, if in a future situation, whatever that may be, if there is a request for revenue, that will be an additional item of money for the council's budget, because there isn't any demand at the moment.
That's correct. There'll be a report to the relevant committee to agree funding. Yeah. Should that be required?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Councillor Petrosky, is it a quick point because I need to draw this to conclusion now? I changed my mind. No, thank you. Yeah, you changed your mind. Oh, as a Green, you're entitled to. Colleagues, if we could draw, can I thank you all for participation in this matter? I don't want to draw too many conclusions because I think we just need to move on, but I think for the record, I do sense there is remaining concern and unease around the table about how we got to this point. And I hope that whoever takes this forward will really take these lessons on board, because the amount of money involved is enormous. The degree of concern is significant and widespread. We have probed, I think, pretty deeply, or as far as we can tonight. But I sense, and I could be wrong, but there's concern and unease around this table which should bother the people who are going to make future decisions on what's left of the money for this project and future projects. This is why I think we do need to look at how we do these things in the future, because the money involved is enormous. We've spent a lot and we've got nothing for it. So in terms of doing our duty as the Audit and Governance Committee, I think people will need to listen to our discussion, and they can ignore us, but it will be at their peril, because this sort of thing is going to happen again, because we're going to have big projects again. Might not be quite as big as this, but they will be big, and it's public money that's being spent. And I suspect many members of the public out there in the real world think this money has been wasted. And that is a concern, I think, for all of us. However, thanks for your participation. I think we've gone as far as we can tonight. But I still think there are more questions to come at the officers. It may be for others to deal with them, but there are more questions to come, because I think the concern and unease is still there. And I think as we go forward to another iteration of whatever somebody is going to decide to do with the money that may or may not be left, is going to raise as many questions as we've tried to answer tonight. But anyway, thank you for your participation. Which actually brings us, we've still got one item left. It's item 10, Best Value Assurance Report. And Mr. Flynn is going to introduce that. And can I thank the members of the public for coming along tonight?
Thank you, Chair. This is a follow-up from our previous discussion at the previous committee, when we were looking at the government's reintroducing the concept, or re-energising the concept of best value, and started to explore ways in which the government can assure itself, the department can assure itself in advance of councils reaching the Section 114 stage, and say, well, what information is available? Now, we'll be familiar with Offlog that has come along. We've been talking about them at all the committees in terms of performance management and the indicators which they're using to gain themselves about the financial standing of the council. But for us, it's much wider than just financial standing. It's also about culture, it's about governance, many of the things we've been talking about tonight, leadership, use of resources, service delivery, and so on. So there are a wide range of things which we need to take into account. And I'm particularly struck by, at the bottom of page 113, there's a note there from the Best Value Standards Intervention Guidance, which says the Secretary of State's decision to intervene when and what form that intervention should take relies on the analysis of a complex set of data and circumstances. It's not just one thing or one set of indicators which would tell us whether the organisation's functioning as well as it could. We already have a wide range of things which Chris is in charge of marshalling and ensuring that they all work and they all support our internal control environment. They find their way into committees, they find their way into our annual governance statement. All of these things work together to create a picture of how well the organisation is functioning. So as far as this has got, it's not a final proposal, it's just a development of the idea we talked about last time. I tried to find as many things as possible without inventing any new ones, which could be brought together to provide some sort of regular report to the committee about how we're progressing across this wide range of things and trying to address that best value decision. So the proposal in that small appendix there is that we produce a regular report giving a snapshot of how we're progressing on all of these matters. So the idea is that potentially we could rank rate these, so we could say, yes, that one's in place, it's up to date, it's current, it's been agreed. That one is not as up to date as it could be, and this one is absent. And then the audit committee then can look and perhaps do a deep dive in certain areas if you want to look at more about the SITFA Financial Resilience Index, or how we're doing in terms of responding to complaints, etc., etc. So the idea is just to try and find a way of bringing all these things together in a place, give us a picture of how well we're doing, and of course work alongside our internal auditors to give members the assurance that they're looking for in terms of how the organisation is set up, whether we're in the right place, and to use that phrase which we coined a little while ago, that sort of "are we safe" position that we want to know about. I don't know, Sean, if you want to add to that.
Sean, anything you'd like to add?
Not particularly, just to obviously recognise that this is a dynamic environment and there isn't one set of measures that we can port in. The sector is talking about self-scrutiny. We've heard about the limitations of and the legacy of the external audit challenges. And so that awful jargon word dashboard, we're proposing a dashboard of measures which may itself change and be subject to review, but it gives us all, officers and members, a good template to work from. The annual governance statement is always necessarily a look back at a year that's finished, and this gives us some real-time data during the year and can be used as the half-year assessment against the annual governance statement. So it's another tool, really, and as we know, in terms of good governance behaviours, prompts and challenges is a good mechanism for everybody, officers and members. So it's offered as a set of prompts and challenges. It's not the only statement. Again, as part of a governance review of the council, we may overlap with some of these questions, and the organisation quoted at the end of the document, the Centre for they've renamed themselves. They're now called the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. Their sort of fairly new governance, risk and resilience framework also gives us a self-assessment mechanism, and we would want to look at that as part of a governance review as well. So this is our sort of first pass at a dashboard, and it will change and evolve over time, Chair.
Thank you. Do members have any questions or comments on this? If you recall, this basically was called for at the last meeting when we felt that members needed to be updated from time to time on a regular basis as to whether there was any hint or any suggestion that we might be going bust, given the Birmingham and quite a number of other councils as well. So I think we now have in place the mechanism so we can see what's going on. We can be alerted. The officers, therefore, will be alerted themselves because they will be producing the reports for us. And so where it says in the recommendation, consider the proposed methodology, what that actually means is that we endorse paragraphs 4.6 and 4.7. So if you are happy to endorse paragraphs 4.6 and 4.7, as Ms Stroud said, this is a dynamic situation. This is the first iteration, I think, of what we'll be looking at, but it will change. But I think what we've set in motion, which is the first time we've had this, is a very, very, very early warning of any hint that we're in financial trouble, to the extent that, although technically we can't go bust, we have a Section 114 notice, in the public's mind, that's what it means. And we need to be alerted to that to take action. But we're not anywhere near that, I'm pleased to say, at the moment. So are you happy if we endorse paragraphs 4.6 and 4.7, and which is the recommendation in paragraph 1.1? So agree, can I have a show of hands, please, just to make sure? Right, that is unanimous. Thank you for that. That takes us to item 10, any other business? There is none. Just before you go, can I just say, first of all, to members and officers, thank you very much for your attendance. And we've had a very good debate, I think, tonight. It's been probing, which is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We're doing our job, so there's no need for anybody to apologise for that. I think if one looks back over a few years, I'm really impressed about how the Audit and Governance Committee has come on. When I first came on some years ago, nobody wanted to be on the committee because we had some audit reports which nobody understood. They were far too thick. We had all these statistics. Nobody understood what they were doing. And so it was, should I say, a bit dry, let's put it that way. But you can see from the discussion we've had tonight, the discussion we've had on other issues, how we've developed the governance side of the committee. And I think we have seen tonight, we have a very important role. I mean, I think perhaps if procedures, people like us have been involved earlier, call it scrutiny, call it audit, whatever, we might not have, there might not have been so many questions about where we're at with the Scala project, at least. So again, thank you for your involvement, your inclusion, and members for the reports. I know I can be at times demanding, but we've all done a good job, I think. The committee has developed enormously over the last few years, and I hope it stays that way. So on that point, I close the meeting and thank you very much.